You ever walk into a room and feel like you don't even exist? Like, you're there physically, but to everyone else, you might as well be a shadow in the corner? That was me. Every single time I was around my wife's family. And trust me, it's not because I'm shy, or quiet, or don't know how to hold a conversation. It's because they decided, from day one, that I wasn't worth their time. I still remember the first dinner at her parents' house after we got engaged. They didn't even look me in the eye. Her mom would talk to my wife like I wasn't sitting 2 seats away. Her dad barely grunted hello. And her brothers? Oh, they were the worst. Cracking inside jokes, leaning toward her, never once looping me in. I sat there, smiling, nodding, trying to blend in. But inside I was thinking, okay, I get it. You don't like me. You know that feeling when you try too hard and it makes you feel even more pathetic? Yeah, that was me that night. And here's the thing. It didn't stop after we got married. If anything, it got worse. Family holidays were the same. I'd bring a bottle of wine, maybe a dessert, something thoughtful, and it would get shoved to the side like it didn't matter. Conversations would flow around me like I was some piece of furniture. And my wife? She'd smile awkwardly. Give me that. Just ignore them. Look. But she never called them out. I told myself I could live with it. That I didn't need their approval. That I loved her enough to put up with it. But the truth is, it ate at me. Every snide remark, every dismissive glance, every time her dad introduced me to someone as, oh, this is, my daughter's husband, instead of my name, it stuck. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just tired. And then came the prenup. Yeah, a lot of people hate that word, but in our case, it made sense. When we got married, I didn't have much. A modest job, a used car, maybe a couple thousand in savings. She came from a comfortable family, you know. The kind that uses comfortable as code for, we've got money. Her parents insisted on a prenup to protect her, and I agreed. Because I wasn't marrying her for money. I signed it without hesitation. It basically said that what she had before the marriage stayed hers, and anything we built together, we'd share. No big deal. Or so I thought. Fast forward about 10 years. Life happened. Careers shifted. And somehow, through a combination of hard work, luck, and a few very smart investments, I went from scraping by to, well, wealthy. Like, we can retire early, wealthy. Like, private invitations to events I never even knew existed, wealthy. And suddenly, guess who started noticing me? That same family who treated me like I was invisible. Suddenly, I was part of the family. Suddenly, her dad wanted to talk investments. Her mom wanted my opinion on remodeling the vacation house. Her brothers, they were all about we should hang out more. Not gonna lie, it felt good at first. I thought maybe they'd come around. Maybe they saw me differently now. But the truth is, it wasn't me they saw. It was my bank account. And the real kicker? One night, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. We were at her parents' place for dinner. Everyone sitting around after the meal. I stepped out to take a call, came back quietly, and they didn't hear me. Her mom, her dad, her brothers, all talking in hushed voices about how we might have to revisit that prenup. My wife was quiet, too quiet, and her mom said, "It's not fair. He's worth so much now. You need to make sure what's yours stays yours." And her dad chuckled, "Yeah, and maybe a little more." My chest went cold. I didn't say a word, just slipped back outside and stood there in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat. That's when it hit me they never saw me as family. Never. To them, I was just an obstacle. And now, a target. I wanted to storm back in, call them out, but something in me said, wait. play the long game. So I smiled through dessert, made small talk, acted like nothing happened. But inside, I was already planning. And here's the thing. Once you know someone's true intentions, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to pretending. And I wasn't going to pretend anymore. What I didn't realize was that the way I was going to fight back would not only shock them, it would change everything about our marriage, our family, and what they thought they could get away with. But before I could do that, I had to find out just how far they were willing to go. And trust me, I didn't have to wait long. A couple weeks later, I got my answer. You know how sometimes you think people are scheming behind your back, but you're not sure if you're just being paranoid? Yeah, this wasn't that. This was the real deal. It started when my wife came home one evening with this casual suggestion. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, twirling her coffee cup, not meeting my eyes. And she says, "Hey, I've been thinking, maybe we should update our paperwork. You know, wills, accounts, the prenup." My stomach tightened. She tried to make it sound innocent, like she was just being responsible, but I could hear her mother's voice in the back of my head. Revisit that prenup. So I asked her straight up, "Why? What's changed?" And she gave me this rehearsed little laugh and said, "Oh, nothing. I just think we should be prepared. In case, you know, something happens." I didn't push it right then, because I knew if I did, she'd clam up. But my brain was already spinning. If she was bringing it up, that meant they'd been talking about it. And if they'd been talking about it, there was a plan. Truth is, I wanted to know what the plan was before I made a move. So I played along. I told her, "Sure, we can look at it. Why don't you get the paperwork together?" And she smiled like she'd just won something. Over the next week, little things started happening. Her brother, the one who barely spoke to me for years, called me out of the blue, asking if I'd be interested in partnering on a real estate deal. Her dad sent me an article about protecting family assets. And her mom? She suddenly wanted to have lunch, just the two of us, which had literally never happened before. Not once. At that lunch, she was all sugar and smiles, until she wasn't. Midway through, she leans in and says, "You know, with the amount you've built up, it would be wise to make sure things are fair for everyone." I just looked at her, trying not to smirk. Fair in her language meant tilted in our favor. I nodded like I was considering it, and she seemed satisfied. That's when I decided I needed proof, not just my word against theirs. So I started recording. Yeah, I know. Sounds sneaky. But after years of being treated like a nobody, then overhearing them plot against me, I figured, gloves off. Every conversation, every phone call, every awkward, let's meet and talk session, I had it. And what I got was worse than I expected. They weren't just trying to change the prenup. They were talking about ways to make it seem like my wealth was somehow community property that could be divided differently. Her dad even floated the idea that my investments had been seeded, with money from their side, which was a flat-out lie. My wife, she didn't argue in those conversations. She didn't defend me. She just sat there, or nodded, or asked questions like, "Well, how would that work?" And that hurt more than anything. Not gonna lie, I had a couple nights where I just sat in my car after work, staring at the steering wheel, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. I loved her, or at least, I loved the version of her I thought I knew. But now, I was starting to wonder if she'd ever been on my side. You ever have that moment where you realize the person you trust most might actually be the one holding the knife? That's where I was. I knew I couldn't confront them yet, not without a plan. And I wanted a plan that would make them wish they'd never underestimated me. So I called my attorney, the same guy who had looked over the original prenup. I told him everything. I played him some of the recordings. He didn't even blink. Just said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. For the next month, I pretended to go along with whatever my wife and her family suggested. We met with advisors they recommended. We reviewed draft documents they brought up. Meanwhile, my attorney was quietly locking down every asset I had, restructuring accounts, and making sure every investment was clearly and provably mine with a paper trail a mile long. I was acting normal on the outside, smiling, agreeing, letting them think they were making progress, but inside, I was a coiled spring. And then, they made their move. One night, my wife came home with a folder. She said it was just some updates to look over. I opened it, and there it was. A completely rewritten agreement that would have stripped me of a massive portion of what I'd built if anything happened to our marriage. I looked at her, and she smiled like she was handing me a gift. "It's just a formality," she said. My hands itched to slam the folder shut and call her out right there. But I didn't. Instead, I told her I'd think about it. And that night, while she was asleep, I scanned every page, sent it to my attorney, and waited. The next day, he called me and said, "You ready to end this?" I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I had to, because at that point, it wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about the fact that they thought they could erase me, rewrite the story, and come out on top. And I was about to show them just how wrong they were. 2 days later, I set the stage. You ever get that rush before you pull the trigger on something big? Not the kind of trigger that hurts someone physically, but the kind that's gonna flip their whole world upside down? That's where I was. My attorney had set up a family meeting under the pretense of going over the prenup changes. We did it at their place, because I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them thinking they had the upper hand. My wife, her parents, both her brothers all sitting in the living room, smiling like sharks. They had no idea I'd been recording for weeks. My attorney walks in, shakes hands, sits down, and says, "All right, before we begin, I just want to confirm. You all agree that we're here to discuss potential revisions to the prenuptial agreement?" They all nod, almost in sync. Her mom's got that smug look. Her dad's leaning back like he's already won. And my wife, she's biting her lip, like she's nervous but trying to hide it. That's when my attorney pulls out a small digital recorder and says, "Great, because before we look at any documents, my client thought it would be helpful to play back some of your previous discussions on this topic." And he hits play. The room goes dead quiet except for the sound of their own voices plotting, suggesting lies, talking about making sure what's hers stays hers, and maybe a little more. You could see the color drain from her mom's face. Her dad sat up straight, his eyes darting at me, then at the recorder, like maybe it would stop if he stared hard enough. My wife, she froze, didn't move, didn't even breathe. I think, when the recording ended, my attorney looked around and said, "Now, given this context, my client sees no reason to alter the original agreement. In fact, we'll be adding a clause to protect his assets from any future claims of this nature." Her dad tried to puff up and say, "This is taken out of context," but my attorney cut him off. "No, it's not, and we have more where that came from." The silence after that was delicious. I could feel years of being ignored, dismissed, treated like I didn't matter, just melting away. Not because I wanted revenge, okay, maybe a little, but because they finally had to look at me. Really look at me. And they didn't like what they saw. I stood up, looked at my wife, and said, "You could have told them no. You could have stopped this before it started. But you didn't." She opened her mouth like she wanted to defend herself, but nothing came out. I grabbed my coat, thanked my attorney, and walked out. For the next few weeks, things were tense. My wife tried to apologize, tried to say she'd been pressured by her family, that she didn't mean for it to go that far, and maybe that was true. But trust, once it's cracked like that, it's hard to fix. We went to counseling. We had long, ugly conversations. I made it clear that if she ever tried something like that again, it was over. As for her family, they kept their distance. No more, let's hang out. No more fake smiles. They'd retreat to the other side of the room at gatherings. And you know what? I liked it that way. I didn't need them in my life. I didn't need their approval. I had my own success, my own life. And if my wife truly chose to stay in it, she'd have to understand that it came with boundaries now. But here's the thing. I didn't stop there. Quietly, I made sure they knew I'd used part of my wealth to help people who actually appreciated it. Charities, scholarships, community projects. Stuff they couldn't touch. And one of those projects? It ended up making the local news. Guess who saw it? Her parents. Guess who had to watch me shake hands with people who respected me? Yeah, them. I can't say it fixed everything, but it sure as hell reminded me, and them, that I wasn't some shadow in the corner anymore. I'd built something on my own, and no one, not them, not anyone was going to erase it. And that prenup? Still intact. Stronger than ever. You ever have that moment where you finally stand up and realize you should have done it years ago? That was me, walking away from that meeting with the recording still warm in my pocket. And if I learned anything, it's this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting. It's showing them you're 3 steps ahead and making sure they never forget it. You know, funny thing is, a few months later, I found out this wasn't the first time they'd tried something like this. There was another guy before me who almost married into the family, and the story of how they ran him off, let's just say, it made my situation look tame. But that's a whole other story. And trust me, you're gonna want to hear it.